Hello and welcome to the analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated December 14th, 2022. In this video, we are going to talk about two important newspaper articles. Now, these articles are going to be very important, very significant for the civil services examination, but this doesn't discard the fact that other articles which are present in the Hindu newspaper weren't important. So, as a list of all the important newspaper articles which are present in the Hindu newspaper, they are going to be very important, very significant for the civil services examination. But out of these, only two require very basic attention or very fundamental attention from us, and that is why we are going to discuss just two important newspaper articles. And if you want the PDF of all the important newspaper articles and all the important PDFs, then you need to follow us on Telegram. The channel is by the name itself, the Bureaucratic Way in Telegram. You can search it out there, and do subscribe to this channel to never miss an update from the Bureaucratic Way. So with this, let's now head to the first important newspaper article for the day. Now, this particular newspaper article talks about the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi talked about a tall figure in the Indian politics at the time of Indian national movement, who is known as Aurobindo Ghosh or Sri Aurobindo. Now, he is a tall figure, he is important, and that is why this particular article becomes very significant, very important for the civil services examination. Now, the first topic of which it is important is the prelims section, history of India and Indian national movement. You can be asked the question about his literary work and something like that. And it is also important for GS paper 1, that is modern Indian history from about the middle of the 18th century until the present, significant events, personalities, issues, etc. Right? Now, this particular article talks about the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed Sri Aurobindo's life and work as reflecting the oneness and cultural preeminence of the country. And he also said that the poet's philosopher's work focuses basically on modern thoughts. He also talks about higher consciousness, and he also talks about uncompromising nationalism, which is very relevant for India's leadership role in the world in greater measure, right? Now that we have talked about this particular article, let's talk about who is Sri Aurobindo, because that is more important for us, right? So now Sri Aurobindo is basically, but before that, why this particular thing is in news, in so much of news? So Prime Minister on 15th August 2022 had set up a 53-member committee to mark the 150th birth anniversary of spiritual leader Sri Aurobindo. Now, this particular committee is basically forming the opinions regarding all of the other things, right? And his work. And now let's discuss who is basically Sri Aurobindo. So, Aurobindo Ghosh was basically born in Calcutta on 15th August 1872. He was a yogi, seer, philosopher, poet, and Indian nationalist who propounded a philosophy of divine life on earth through spiritual evolution. Now, spiritual evolution is important, right? Now, let's talk about the fact that now he died on 5th December 1950 in Pondicherry, and he was a very tall figure in the Indian national movement. He played a lot of role in it, and he basically was educated in the Christian convent school in Darjeeling, and he entered the University of Cambridge, where he became proficient in 2 classical and several modern European languages. And in 1892, he held various administrative posts in Baroda and Calcutta. Now he began the study of yoga and Indian languages, including classical Sanskrit, and he also played a lot of role in the Indian revolutionary movement. Now, from 1902 to 1910, he partook in the struggle to free India from the British. As a result of his political activities, he was imprisoned in 1908 in Alipur bomb case. He was implicated in it because of his cousin, right? That is what is there. Now, 2 years later, he fled British India and found refuge in the French colony of Pondicherry, because Pondicherry was basically then a French colony. It was not part of British India, and that is why he fled over there, and he set up and he devoted himself for the rest of his life to the development of his integral yoga with an aim of a fulfilled and spiritual transformed life on earth. Basically, he set up an ashram over there, which is known as Aurobindo ashram, right? and there he devoted all of his life towards the integral yoga with the aim of fulfilled and spiritually transformed life on earth. This is the basic work of him. Now he wrote many literary works as well, but before that let's talk about spirituality. Now in Pondicherry, he founded a community of spiritual seekers which took shape as the Sri Aurobindo Ashram in 1926, and he believed that the basic principles of matter, life and mind would be succeeded through terrestrial evolution by the principle of supermind as an immediate power between the two spheres of the infinite and the finite, right? This is basically the spirituality of aspect of it. Let's now talk about the literary works, because he wrote a lot of newspapers as well as he wrote some of the books. Now the first newspaper, he wrote an English newspaper, or he was part of, or he was editor of the English newspaper called Vande Mataram in 1905, and he wrote Basis of Yoga, Bhagavad Gita and its message, and he also wrote The Future Evolution of Man. He wrote Rebirth and Karma. He wrote Savitri, A Legend and a Symbol, and he also wrote Hour of God. So these are some of the literary works of the Aurobindo Ghosh, right? And if you are more interested into them, this is all of the, if you are more interested in the work of the Aurobindo Ghosh, then it is the complete detail of what he wrote in his lifetime, right? It will explain you all the basic philosophies he embodied, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now this particular newspaper article was present in the world section and talks about a technology known as fusion technology. Now this is basically nuclear fusion. Now the nuclear fusion is being harnessed. We know that nuclear fusion is present in the sun, but now the nuclear fusion is being harnessed, or this particular energy is being harnessed in the laboratory in a controlled manner. This is the basic essence of this particular newspaper article, and this particular newspaper article is important for the GS paper 3, that is science and technology developments and their applications and effects in everyday life. This article talks about the fact that US researchers announced a historic nuclear fusion breakthrough on Tuesday that could pave the way for alternative clean energy sources. All right. So now the US Department of Energy described the achievement of fusion ignition as a major scientific breakthrough that will lead to advancements in national defense and future of clean power. Basically, how clean power? Because nuclear fusion reactions we know at this point of time. All the nuclear power plants use nuclear fission, but we do not use nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission, which is basically at this particular point of time used in the nuclear power plants, does give rise to some amount of nuclear waste. But in the case of nuclear fusion, you do not get much of the nuclear waste, and that is why it is an alternative clean energy sources. Now the basic problem with the nuclear fusion is that you cannot, or you are not able to produce it at the commercial level, and in this case we are not even able to produce it in the laboratory. But for the first time we are now able to produce in the laboratory, and this work has been done by what is known as Livermore National Laboratory in California. Now they used a powerful laser to focus enormous energy on a miniature capsule half the size of a BB. Now this particular capsule was having some kind of nuclear elements, right? And this particular nuclear elements, or this particular nuclear capsule in which nuclear elements were there, it basically a powerful laser focused on them, and an enormous amount of energy was released. Now this particular energy was 1.5 more times more energy than was contained in the light used to produce it, which means that it can be used commercially because it produces 1.5 times the energy that it is consumes. It consumes 1 times energy and it produces 1.5 times energy. Now fusion fuel in the capsule got squeezed because of this focus of the powerful laser, and fusion reaction started. These had all happened before 100 times, but last week for the first time they designed this experiment so that fusion fuel stays hot enough, dense enough and round enough for long enough that it ignited. It needed to ignite and it needed to produce 1.5 times more energy. Earlier, what used to happen is that only 70% of what is energy is utilized. Input was 100%, output was what? 70%. But in this case, in this particular experiment, now it is producing energy of 150%, which means 50% more energy, right? And this makes it commercially viable, right? Now let's understand what is nuclear fusion, because we have understood what was done in this particular experiment. Let's now understand what is this particular nuclear fusion. Now the reaction happens when the two nuclei merge to form a single heavier nucleus. Now we have cells, inside them what is known as nucleus, right? When there is a single pair, then you call it nuclei, right? When you have two pairs, right? When you have a pair, it is called nuclei, right? Two light nuclei were basically merged with each other. They were added and it formed a heavier nuclei, right? It formed a single heavier nucleus, right? This is what happens in the case of nuclear fusion. And because the total mass of that single nucleus is less than the mass of the two original nuclei, the leftover mass is energy that is produced in the process, right? If this particular nuclei has 1 gram of energy, 1 gram of mass, and the second one also has 1 gram of mass, then the resultant of this combination should be 2 grams. But if you apply nuclear fusion, then it will only produce 1.5 gram of mass, and the other 0.5 gram will produce what? Energy. This will be emitted as energy, and this is basically how the nuclear fusion reaction happens, right? So now the scientists have long understood how nuclear fusion has worked and have been trying to duplicate the process on Earth as far as back in 1930s. And nuclear fusion is basically but functioning in the sun. It produces energy in the sun. So the scientists thought that it could be applied to the human laboratories as well. It can be used to produce energy in the earth as well in the controlled laboratories. And this particular nuclear fusion imitation has been going on since the 1930s. But now only we have been able to produce it in the laboratory. And in the decades to come, it is not very clear whether they will be commercially viable or not, right? So now how valuable could this particular experiment be? Now nuclear fusion offers the possibility of basically unlimited fuel if the technology can be made commercially viable. Now the elements needed are available in the seawater, which makes it very, very commercially viable. If you make it commercially viable, if you solve all the hurdles that are going on in order to make it commercially viable, then it can be used very heavily as a clean alternative, right? And it's also a process that doesn't produce the radioactive waste of nuclear fusion. In nuclear fusion, what happens? There is a lot of nuclear waste that is generated. But in the case of nuclear fusion, there is no radioactive waste generated, right? So now, how are scientists trying to do this? On one way, scientists have tried to recreate nuclear fusion involves what's called a tokamak, a donut-shaped vacuum chamber that uses powerful magnets to turn fuel into a superheated plasma between 150 million and 300 million degrees Celsius, where fusion may occur. And the Livermore lab uses different techniques, with researchers firing a 192 beam laser at a small capsule filled with deuterium tritium fuel. This particular fuel is trapped in a capsule, and then a powerful laser hits on it. 192 beam laser hits it, and then it produces what is known as nuclear fusion, according to the Livermore lab, right? So now it has a lot of challenges at this particular point of time, and the challenge ahead of the scientist is just basically to how to make it more commercially viable, because it takes more than extreme heat and pressure. It also requires a lot of precision, and the energy from the lasers must be applied precisely to counteract the outward force of the fuel. And that's just to prove that the net energy gain is possible. and it's even harder to produce electricity in a power plant because this particular process has not even been made very viable in the laboratories. It's very hard to make it even more viable for the production of electricity in the power plant. For example, the lab's lasers can only fire a few times a day. Now, to make it more viable to produce energy, they would need to fire rapidly, and capsules need to be inserted multiple times a minute or even faster, which is a great challenge ahead for the scientists. And another challenge is to increase the efficiency, because the lasers used at Livermore require a lot of electrical energy, and researchers need to figure out a way to reproduce their results in a much more cost effective way. So the challenges are basically two. First is to make it commercially viable, and the second is to make it more efficient. If these two challenges are solved, then it will become commercially viable, right? It can be used to produce electrical energy, and at the same time it will serve as a clean alternative as compared to the nuclear fission. So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. If I think you have understood what is written in this particular newspaper article, and if you want to get the PDF of this particular presentation, then you need to join us on Telegram, because there we are providing all of this particular material in the form of PDF, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper analysis. Thank you from my side. Do like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. Bye.